And a very warm welcome to, well, that's the thing, isn't it? We haven't quite got a name pinned down yet, have we?
No, it could be anything. It could be nothing.
There have been a few darting through the reeds, but we haven't had a clear line of sight just yet on one. But
we haven't got our ducks in a line yet.
But I mean, the Scott and Lars show is a kind of running title, isn't it? I personally, Lars, I liked your title of Two Dicks Talking Bollocks.
Yeah, I like that one too. I just sort of, jumped out at me.
If it's sufficiently family friendly to actually use as the title, then that may well be it. I mean, by the time you're listening, as in you, the listener, hello to you, the listener.
Hello.
Then, of course, there will be a name, and you'll already know what it is. But we don't know what it is yet. At this moment in time, there is no name. I was thinking
podcast of mystery.
Well, I was thinking of like pun-based titles around. Most of them were pod awful, to be honest.
Oh,
yeah, I mean, some of them, for pod's sake. As if I was a listener and I'd heard that we'd gone with something like that, I'd just think, there, but for the grace of pod, go I. And I'd turn off, to be honest. Prattle, twaddle, waffle. I quite like just one. Well, they're just good words, aren't they? But anyway, enough of that. By now, it's arrived at a name, and that's all that matters.
Well, I think really all that matters is that we're involved. We are gods among men. We are, unique, dazzling diamonds amongst a sea of pebbles, frankly. And anything that we touch with any part of either of us is uniquely changed, therefore, forever.
I don't think I've ever heard you so modest, man. Well, that's really toned it down for this, haven't you?
Too right.
And so, let's introduce ourselves quickly. I am Scott, and that was Loz.
Hello.
And on that note, welcome to whatever this show is called. Cue theme music. Might look to replace that jingle with something better down the line. I don't know. It was very much done on a whim, and it hasn't started annoying me yet. So
I'm sure it wasn't done on a choumb.
I know a choumb. I don't know where that came from. So anyway, we'll let's just see how that goes. But for the time being, that's the theme music. So, why a podcast, Lars? Because
why indeed?
Because no one's asked for it, have they?
Wow. I mean, you say that. I mean, oftentimes I feel like the world is crying out for me, and I'm just looking for a way that I can fulfill that need without really being too asked about it. So, the podcast seemed to lend itself. Talking and being sat down is something that I can definitely do without payment.
Well, I'm glad to be the driver of that vehicle for you. I mean, so Loz and I go back 20 years, if not 20 years and another year, because it was high school, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I suppose it would be 20 years or 21, about that age of 12, 13. We met in high school. We were kind of split. We weren't in the same classes for about a year, and then all of a sudden you came into a maths group, and the seat to the right of me was free, and then boom bow, we were sharing a desk for two, and we just sort of hit it off, didn't we?
Boom bow.
Yeah,
we certainly did. Who'd have thought that maths would be the thing that brought us together? Although I do wonder whether it was both of our lack of interest in maths that gave us the position to arse about.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I feel like one day it'll be maths that somehow tears us apart. Who knows? But yeah, we just sort of hit it off. We had a bit of a Vic and Bob style thing going on, and like anyone who's listening that knows us from high school will probably remember some of the insane video projects we used to turn in for homework.
How could you not, frankly?
And so I guess this is just a natural progression from that, and some might see it as a regression because we've removed the visual element, and it's just a work of sonics rather than sonics plus optics.
Well, I don't know about you, Scott, but I want to be taken seriously. And I feel like sometimes, when you see something presented by somebody incredibly sort of beautiful, like both of us are, that really it sort of overshadows what could be true intellectual discourse. So I feel that this might be the way to ease ourselves into the collective consciousness, and then there may well be room to expand.
Reintroduce ourselves to a new society, as it were, because the world is very different since we were doing those projects.
The world is falling apart, and it needs our help, Scott.
Yeah. Well, you brought a sickle, I brought a hammer, so let's get cracking. What should we? Well, I suppose what we should probably do before we actually get into what we're doing is maybe like name some of our favorite podcasts, because I don't know about you, but I'm quite an avid podcast listener. I've got a kind of so just a real some out. A test match special is something that I found really cathartic listening to at the end of the day in bed, just listening to the review on whatever cricket's happened. The album years is one I particularly like, which is Stephen Wilson, one of my favorite artists, and his cohort Timothy Bowness. And what they do is they discuss between the years of 1965 to 2000 and the turn of the millennium. Those are the years where they deem the album to be of musical critical importance, whereas nowadays the format has somewhat shifted. And they just go through a year each time and discuss albums at an incredible level. That, you know, we're going to get into stuff later on where you might think that we're a bit of an anorak on our respective subjects that we're going to talk about, but those guys are into the stratosphere.
It's a real deep dive.
Yeah, it is. And then you've got Athletico Mints, which I love, which is basically Bob Mortimer and Andy Dawson with accentuated brackets motion, a football podcast, which just goes off in typical Bob Mortimer related directions. And I suppose probably the one I've listened to the most down the years is like it's called the Ricky Gervais Show, but of course it's Ricky, Steve Merchant and Carl Pilkington. And there's hundreds of hours of that material on YouTube. If you haven't heard that, do check that out in conjunction with the rest of this, obviously.
Well, I mean, I am certainly less experienced than you, but yeah, there's definitely bits of the Ricky Gervais podcast that is absolutely legendary.
I think it's XFM, the radio show they worked on before the podcast even existed. They're the ones that I'd recommend going to. So yeah, you know, what sort of stuff do you listen to?
Well, I don't think I've got quite as varied taste as you, Scott. I have to admit, I've always had a sneaky penchant for wrestling, and I quite liked as a child the escapades of the WWE wrestlers, and nowadays it's really sort of fallen on the wayside. And what I quite like about the What Culture WWE podcasts is what they do is essentially just rip the piss out of a really, really moneyed company with lots of resources and lots of sort of, you know, good wrestlers and promising talents at their disposal, and instead book inane rubbish and charge billions for it, which is quite amazing. It's quite nice to hear sort of informed sources absolutely deconstructing and putting them to shame, frankly. So that's as entertaining as any of the shows have been recently. So that's what I enjoy.
I used to love, I think it was WWF at the time, SmackDown, you know, growing up. That and I must admit, I'm a fan of What Culture, the channel. I'm not really on nodding terms with what they do in the world of wrestling. I like their gaming channel. And yeah, I've spent many an hour on YouTube watching some of their lists of things.
Oh, so exactly. They're funky little Geordie lads, the most of them, bless them. But yeah.
Talking of funky little Geordie lads, there's a podcast. In fact, this is kind of bringing us. In fact, no, I'll come back to these guys in a minute.
Okay.
So a couple of things, I guess, to establish, Lars, before we move forward and proceed with this. Is this going to be family friendly, this podcast, or can we expect words of a sensitive nature at any point?
I think within reason. I don't like children, so the fact that anything that I might be involved with to be family friendly is almost insulting.
Is saying I don't like children family friendly?
Well, yeah, I suppose it isn't. Is it?
Discussion, yeah.
But by its very nature, it isn't family friendly. That is to say, I don't think either of us intend to be particularly vulgar, but
No, I think there's a fine line, and particularly because it's very subjective in what word offends one and not another. Like, for example, your title for the show, I love, but even that might have crossed the line for us to be able to use as a title. But I suppose when you venture into the F's and the C's of this world, we should try and resist, unless, of course, the desire to try and use it to convey a point we're making about a film we love overcomes that, in which case 3 sheets to the wind, go for it, I say. And we'll just either beep it out or whatever. Or what we could do, if you want to put something on it, maybe the first person to swear to that level has to donate £30,000 to charity.
Only 30,000?
That'll keep people listening.
Keep me in the poorhouse, I think.
Where do you stand on innuendo? I think we can't. I mean, I should have asked this question before I made any preparation for this podcast, because if you'd said we're not doing innuendo, then I'd have wasted my time. I'd have backed out of this project. Yeah,
it's microphones down.
Yeah.
I think innuendo is a great British tradition, much like queuing and complaining about the weather.
Yeah, quite. Well, okay, we've got some mini ground rules laid down. Let's just go for it and see how long it takes before one of us goes off road in respect of those. How long's this introduction been? Oh, about, I don't know, 12 minutes or so. That's not too bad, is it? So let's get into it. Loz and I have been discussing, well, much twaddle, prattle and waffle down the years. But we rarely, if ever, have we touched on some of the bigger topics in our lives, like, for example, the arts. So we thought let's have a sort of structured discussion on those, because we know each other so well. Yet I'll be very interested to see what you come out with during this podcast, Lars, because there's not much that I feel like I'm certain of.
I think there's a few that will surprise you. There's a few that definitely won't. And I mean, much like yourself, I am the yin to your yang, or the yang to your yin, whichever way around you'd prefer it. And I think that's exactly what's made for a gripping friendship, quite frankly, but also hopefully a gripping podcast, because we're brought together as much by our differences as our similarities. And I think our choices and our reactions to each other's films are going to be really intriguing, because otherwise, obviously, we'd just be having this conversation to ourselves.
Exactly. Yeah.
Lucky you.
And you said film there, and that is the chosen hot potato that we're going for first, isn't it? Film. So
it certainly is.
What we decided to do, and we will sort of play it by ear in terms of how long it goes on for. But we have gone away, got our heads down, and come up with a definitive top 10 films, as far as we're concerned, of all time. And then an additional 10 honourable mentions, because I don't know about you, I found it nigh impossible to pin it down to 10. And there were at least 10 where I thought, well, I want to talk about that film. So here we are with an additional 10 honourable mentions. You could look at it as a top 20 if you like, but the 10 honourable mentions are in no particular order. And to be honest, Lars, I struggled to even leave it there. So I've got a list of mentions, which I'm just going to run through without really commenting on, because otherwise we will be here at midnight and somewhere in the middle of the honourable mentions.
At the end of civilization, I think that we'll still be here with the mentions that could potentially come up. I mean, every film in its way, even the bad ones are worthy of mention. But yes. You just couldn't help yourself, could you little scamp?
No, I couldn't. And so this will be an exercise in my discipline here to run through these films without going off on them. So this is my list of mentions, right? The ones that didn't quite make the cut, as in the top 20. And who knows, some of these might appear for you, I don't know, because there are some excellent films in it. But just if they do, keep stum and we'll get to them down the line.
Stum's the word.
Stum's the word. All right, so I've got American Psycho.
Oh.
Downsizing, which has really surprised me recently, how good that is. Lost in Translation. V for Vendetta.
Nice.
Fantasia, which I can't believe that hasn't made the top 20. And same goes for Shutter Island.
And I thought that would be in your top 10 personally.
Really? Yeah, that didn't even make the top 20 for me. And then The Aviator, which is another Scorsese DiCaprio venture, which is criminally underrated. Wonder how many times I'll say that today. I mean, American Beauty.
Oh yes, yeah.
And I mean, that's a film we've watched together, isn't it? I was going to ask, like, how many films have we actually watched together? There was the Bourne trilogy. I remember we watched.
Oh yeah,
back to back.
A deep cut, but all three like in an afternoon.
It was a house party, wasn't it? At Casa de Los.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, the cinema. Do you remember we were out and about in town doing our separate thing actually, and I bumped into you guys who were going to see something. I think it was like the Transporter 2.
Yes, it was Transporter 2 because it was the Christmas Victorian Fair in Worcester.
Yeah, and I just decided to ditch the people I was with and go off and watch this film because I'd spent the previous 2 hours like necking cocktails and whatever, because that was the path we were all on in our party that night. Going from that into a dark room. By the time the film started, I think I'd fallen asleep, to be honest. I vaguely remember stirring to like Statham maneuvering a vehicle through the air, into and it's some sort of explosion, and then the eyelids went again, and that's it. Someone woke me up at the end.
Well, I think I might have woken you up, because I remember that exact moment where there's a car like flipping upside down with a bomb underneath, and he's used a hook from a crane, I believe, so to detach the device from under the bottom of the car. And I just looked over, and you were practically snoring, head back, so in the middle of this film that you hadn't even planned to go and see, but here we are.
I know. And of all the films to fall asleep during, the Transporter 2 is probably one of the less common ones, I would imagine.
Yeah, not very quiet nor sedate, but you managed it, and congratulations.
Yeah, I mean, there's not many films we've really watched together, I don't think, but American Beauty was what made me think of that. So right, let me get back on course. So 1917, which despite the name is one of the more recent films. First film I watched in the new place, that blew my mind, but I'm going to stick to my guns and not go off on about it. Inglourious Bastards. Again, can't believe. And mini spoiler alert. I don't know. This might be a surprise to you. This might even put some people off listening here on. I don't know. This is the only Tarantino film that I'll be mentioning today.
Wow.
Inglourious Bastards for me is my favourite that he's done, and that didn't even make the top 20. But I'm not having a go. I'm not having a go at Quent. If you're listening, mate, I'm a fan. Right, what have we got next? The Lady Killers, and that's both versions. Oh yeah. The Ealing comedy original. Of course, I sort of grew up partially in Ealing and very close to my heart. And the remake is excellent with
the Tom Hanks version, if I do believe.
Yeah, Goldthwait Higginson Dolls, PhD.
I think that's the one we went to see at the cinema.
Yeah, it must be, because I remember us both howling over the trailer. So there's no way we didn't go to see that.
Oh, exactly. I don't think you would have allowed it even otherwise.
No.
And just whilst I remember, I think we went to see Ali G in the House, which just goes to show not every film can be a classic, but enjoyable.
I think that's that's just another example of something that's so brilliant on TV, not just not cutting it in the film. Alan Partridge, same thing applies. Alpha Papa was distinctly worse than Mid Morning Matters, which is probably his zenith, but we'll get to that in another podcast, right, Lars?
Great word.
We're going to do TV definitely at some point, and I'm
for sure.
I'm probably going to struggle getting that whittled down more than I did with film. Because
when you waffle on as much as we do, I think most subjects will be covered eventually.
Well, I'm already looking at the time and thinking, how should we dish these out? Should we do these in small bite-sized chunks? There's no time limit as such, but let's see where we get to at the end. Because I'm only about halfway through this mentions list at the moment, for Christ's sake. So, right, Johnny English. Now, here's a film I've got a real soft spot for. I think I'll always find it funny, even though it gets less funny the more I see it. I still love it just as much. One Fine Day, that's almost as good as a rom-com can get. And then something you could almost call a rom-com, Dumb and Dumber. And then I cannot believe this one did not make the top 20. The Matrix.
Oh.
Philadelphia, Apocalypse Now.
Wow.
With some classics.
Some heavy hitters.
I know. Ghost. I mean, you'll come to learn, if you don't already, that I love both 90s films and rom-com films. Hence, already One Fine Day and Ghost coming up. And then another ghost film, I suppose you could call it, Paranormal Activity. One and 3. Those two are superb. The rest, bollocks, really. I might be being a little bit harsh on the second one, but the 1 and 3 are superb. Another superb film, Pan's Labyrinth. Can't believe that didn't make it either. And then to try and speed up here, we've got Snatch.
Yeah, oh yeah.
The Thing.
Yeah, you love The Thing.
Sleepless in Seattle, which again, 90s rom-com classic.
Part of your Meg Ryan fetish.
Yeah, well, yeah, we'll get to Meg Ryan shortly. Kubrick. There's a couple of Kubrick films I want to mention here. The Shining, again, how is that not higher up? Clockwork Orange and Full Metal Jacket as well are just incredible pieces of work. And any Kubrick fan who's listening will probably have noted some omissions there, which may or may not be coming up later on.
Oh, spoiler alert.
And then to end off the mentions, Loz, The Muppets Christmas Carol.
Oh, wow. I mean, what more can you say?
So how do you want to do this? How do you want to do this? Because that introduction / including the mentions has taken us to about 20 minutes. Would do you think we should sort of cut it here and make this a short, just hello episode, and then we'll get into our trilogy of film? Or shall we just dive into the honourable mentions now? I'm
not quite sure. I think we might need to pause here. I think it's as good a time as any, and we can always sort of do some surgery in post-production.
Yes, a good call. I'm glad you said that, because I agree. Because if you haven't already clocked it, I'm very passionate about films, as are you, Loz, and we're
certainly am,
and we're gonna be getting into some of our favourite films ever. So yeah, let's end this one here.
Indeed.
And then we will dive into our trilogy of film, which will have the honourable mentions and then our 10 to 5 and then the top 5. How does that sound, everyone?
Indeed. Get your seatbelts, everybody. It's going to be a rough ride.
Yeah, a rip-roaring white knuckle adventure. So,
Indeed.
So thank you for listening to our first ever broadcast introductory thing. And well, let's get going. I mean, because we're going to just end this and then record straight away, aren't we? I think, Loz.
Yeah.
So for us, let's get into it. But for you guys, thank you for listening. And then the next podcast will be getting into our honourable mentions.
Indeed. Merci beaucoup.
Indeed. All right. Godspeed, everyone.
Indeed. Ta-ta.
Ta-da.
Chip, chip, chow.